Hello everyone, Lucy Bardos here from Permaculture Kelowna, Canada, and I'm here today to talk to you about mapping your resources as part of the GOBRADIME design process and your permaculture design project. Now, when you're at the stage that you're mapping your resources, it can sometimes feel a little bit overwhelming, and that's just because resources can be extremely varied and can include everything from sunlight hours to books and libraries to plants and wildlife, friends, tools, machinery, you name it. So I'm here today with some tips and tricks that will hopefully make this process a little bit easier for you. Now, at this stage, you're hopefully already familiar with the permaculture concepts of zones and sectors. And I'm saying that because zones and sectors are actually really useful lenses to use when you're trying to map your resources, and they can make the process a little bit easier. In order to help illustrate what I'm talking about, I've got a simple diagram here for you that you can follow along with as I'm speaking. I should mention that we're beginning with zones first. This is a simplified rendering of the permaculture zones, beginning with the designer and extending through zones 1 to 5. You've probably already spent some considerable time observing and mapping your site, so now it's time to look at your site with your resources glasses on. Let's start with the designer. You may have already established your own knowledge, energy, financial, and time constraints in the boundaries design step. If you reframe that in terms of resources, think about how your knowledge, social connections, and energy will be key resources for making your project come to life. If you've identified gaps or needs, such as a lack of knowledge, for example, think about which resources you will draw on to bridge them. Next, you can take a walk or several through zones 1 to 5 of your design site and make notes about which resources are present in each zone and which resources are needed in each zone. You will notice that zone 1 tends to be more resource intense. If you want to build, say, an annual vegetable garden in your zone 1, will you need to install irrigation? If so, what resources will that require? Can you maybe repurpose any equipment that you have on site already? Or does it rain enough in your area for that to be a resource that can help you meet your irrigation needs? What other resources are located or needed there? Chickens or storage for firewood maybe? Zooming out now, perhaps your zone 2 is full of flowering plants, a resource that is perfect for bees. What tools and materials do you have or will you need to acquire in order to establish thriving beehives there? This same mapping process and thinking process can be repeated for zones 3 to 5. Just as a suggestion, it might be useful for you to highlight the needed and available resources in separate colors, or even to create 2 separate resource overlay maps, one for available resources and another for required resources. Okay, now let's talk about sectors. So if you remember, sectors are all of those wild or uncontrolled energies that pass through your design site. And they can include things such as sunlight and shade, water, pleasant or unpleasant neighbors, wildlife, and many more. And they're a really useful tool for understanding what resources you have on site and which resources you may need in order to complete your project. So you could think about it this way. Imagine that your design site is extremely windy. You could think about using that wind as a resource to power your project or parts of your design. Or if that's not possible, you could think about what resources you would need to incorporate in order to mitigate that wind. That could include something like tree saplings in order to build a windbreak. So as you can see, both zones and sectors are really useful ways of beginning to understand the resources that are at play on your design site. Another really important thing to think about is future resources. So once you've begun the implementation and maintenance steps of the GOBRADIME design process, your project is going to start producing surpluses. And if you think about it, surpluses are really just resources that can be re-injected back into a permaculture system. If a surplus is not used properly, that's when it can become pollution or waste. So one example of using a surplus in a beneficial way could be, say you had a whole bunch of fruit trees, and maybe it's just you and your family on your design site. What could you do with that extra fruit? Well, one way to redistribute that surplus could be to invite a local nonprofit group or volunteer group to come and harvest all of that extra fruit and redistribute it to vulnerable populations in the community. It would help create a lot more new social connections, and it would create a lot less fermenting, rotting fruit for you to clean up. When we're talking about resources, it's really about reframing what you already know and have observed about yourself and your design site, and cross-referencing that against what your goals for your project actually are. You're going to notice quite a lot of overlap between this resources design step and the analysis design step, and that's totally normal. A lot of the thought processes and mapping that you're going to do in this step are going to serve you really well when you do your inputs and outputs for your analysis step. So I just wanted to leave you with the thought that there are many different ways to map and list your resources, and the way that you go about it should be relevant to you and your specific project and design site. Thank you so much for joining me for this video, and I wish you lots of luck in mapping your resources, and I'll see you next time. Thank you. Bye.